but in the innovation we build our bit. Good evening, everyone. I, Samriddhi, feel delighted to welcome you all to Krishi Darshan Agriculture Expert Talk Series by ISAB. This series brings top industry leaders to guide agriculture students across India. Each session is a step towards discovering new possibilities in the agri and allied sectors, and all active participants will receive an e certificate to boost their career profiles. Before we begin today's session, I would like to take this opportunity to invite our director, Sir Dr. Virendra Kumar, Sir, to share a few words and set the tone for this expert talk.
And tell us the gist through various platforms. And I would also like that some of you should do research on this future of vertical farming or the future of food industry. This is a very nice topic, and I'm sure I also will learn a lot of things. Very nice. All of you be focused, alert, and do take notes. Thank you very much. Please invite the speaker.
Thank you so very much, sir.
Private Limited. With years of experience and an unwavering dedication to sustainable agricultural development, he has been instrumental in driving innovation and implementing sustainable solutions through controlled environment, agriculture, and vertical farming technologies. Shunya Fodder and Forage Agritech Private Limited is at the forefront of transforming Indian agriculture by promoting advanced resource efficient farming methods. The company specializes in hydroponics, vertical farming, and controlled environment systems that ensure year-round, high-yield, and nutritious fodder and forage production, even in limited space. We are also sincerely grateful to Mr. Saurabh V. Pandey, sir, founder and promoter of ISAB, and Dr. Virendra Kumar, sir, director of ISAB, for their continuous support, guidance, and vision in making this expert series impactful and meaningful. Now, let's begin our session on a very important topic: controlled agriculture and vertical farming. We look forward to learning from you, sir. The screen is all yours.
All right, thank you. I'm assuming I can be heard, right?
Yes, sir. Most welcome, sir.
Thank you. Okay, guys, let me, I don't enjoy too much of formality, so let me assure you guys that this is not going to be a very formal lecture. My name is Vijay. I am not, I don't have decades of experience on what is called CEA. Most of you would be aware of it, but I have an intensive experience on technology, and then of course I have been working in this space for a couple of years now, so should be able to share a wider perspective of where this industry is currently and where is it ending up going, and why is it important for you guys to probably consider it as a area that you can focus on quite extensively. So Samriddhi mentioned controlled environment, something like that. Let me break it down into what the word calls it. It is CEA, right? So that is controlled environment agriculture, right? Or it is also referred to more in the western part of the world. It is referred to more as indoor ag, right? So indoor ag, by definition, it really means that if you're doing farming indoors, that is what our business is all about, right? So that's what we will focus on today. And let me, right at the beginning, try and break it up into, so I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible. My request to all you guys would be, don't wait, and we will have a Q&A session planned towards the end of the discussion. But I would rather that whenever there are questions in anyone's mind, please raise your hand. Let's have a discussion as we speak. So indoor ag, I would broadly divide that into two parts. right? And I think almost all of you would be familiar with these two parts, but let's just break it down for ease, right? Uh, so all of you have heard of greenhouses, right? So if you look at most of Europe and even Middle East and Israel and maybe even India, most of us have been referring to controlled environment agriculture as greenhouse-based agriculture, right? The definition of a greenhouse-based agriculture is that it is relatively lower heights, but it is still controlled environments, right? So it's controlled environments. Why do we control the environment? Because all of us would either operate in uh, extreme high heat or extreme cold. So how do you continue to get production in those situations? Is why this has come into play. The other branch of the indoor egg would be what are called vertical farms. So vertical farms are predominantly a US Canada strategy, and they've really come into play over the last 20 odd years, where the idea is that it is more or less a warehouse or a kind of a building where they have gone vertically, they have gone tier by tier and done a vertical farm inside buildings. And all of us would have spent time looking at some very fantastic videos of both these kind of situations, right? You would have seen those videos where robots are, doing the farming, etc., in vertical farms. You would have also seen a lot of, especially if you're spending time on Instagram, etc., you would have seen a lot of Indian videos as well, where they're talking in terms of everything from saffron farming to mushroom farming to whatever done in controlled environment, right? So those are the two, the equipment used, etc. We will discuss it at length, right? So we shouldn't get confused about the fact that there are two different. Controlled agriculture is the overview. Within that, there is greenhouses and vertical farmings, right? So that's the first thing that we need to get out of the way, right? So what I think before we get into it and why it should impact your careers long term or your career choices long term or your business choices long term, is to look at why controlled agriculture is probably the need of the hour, right? I would say need of the decade, right? It will take time before it becomes mainstream, but why do we need it? So all of you would be familiar. Or if someone can tell me, what do you think is the percentage of humanity that lives in the cities currently? So I know we can't see all of you, so let me take that forward. So as things stand today, about 50% of humanity lives in urban centers around the world, right? So that's a very large number of people living in a very small space. They generate a lot of waste. They generate a lot of. They need a lot of food, etc., etc., and all their food comes from distances far off, right? So I'll first address why CEA is needed in the urban context. So, like I said, 50%. In the next 25 years, it is expected that 70% of humanity will live in cities, right? So 70% humanity living in cities would mean approximately about 7 billion people who are living in close quarters, right? And their whatever they need to eat has to come into the city, right? So there's a section of food that we all eat, which we are all aware of, things like veggies and leafy vegetables, potatoes, tomatoes, sorry, not potatoes, tomatoes, etc., uh, which can't stand very long transits, right? So you guys would have already read, but I'm just reinforcing that you'd be aware that probably about 30%, it is said that 30% of produce actually gets wasted in transit, right? So if you think of maybe 100 tons of leafy vegetable that is farmed maybe 200 kilometers away from Delhi, by the time it gets into the Delhi mandi and then it gets into our homes, 30% of that produce is lost, right? So logic has it that if we can move production close to the point of consumption, right? So if we can get veggies to be grown closer to the cities, why closer to the cities? Why not in the cities? So if the consumption points and the production points are close by, it obviously starts making that much more sense. So what, as a customer, what you will get is obviously very, very fresh. Go ahead, Ankit. Ankit, you had a question? Go ahead.
Kuldeep, unmute Ankit, please.
Ankit, if you can hear us, you could unmute and ask the question. Otherwise, we'll move on, right? I don't know what was I talking about. Yeah, so
Ankit, kindly turn on your
Kuldeep,
camera first.
okay. Kuldeep, please unmute Ankit Yadav.
And Ankit, kindly turn on your camera, please. So can we take questions at the end?
sure.
Yes.
Works. But Ankit, don't lose that thought. Huh? Keep the idea around, whatever that you wanted to ask. Okay, so if we can move the point of production into the city, right? It would mean that as customers, we are in a position to get something which is fairly fresh. So typically, what will get taken off from the growing space can reach my home within a few hours rather than it taking currently, for example, uh, if it is coming from, let's say, Eastern UP all the way to Delhi and then coming into our homes, then probably the time taken is about 5 days, right? So as against that, if I can get it within 5 hours, that obviously makes that much more sense. The food is tastier, it is fresher, etc. And I'm obviously, as a customer, I benefit. I also don't have too many road miles on that particular food, right? Because the big issue that everyone's trying to do is to reduce as much as carbon footprint as possible. So every time there's a transport elimination that can be done, it obviously works. Now, how can we grow food in the urban cities is what our CEA does, right? Now, as against that, that's from an urban perspective, right? But we should also look at the controlled agriculture from a rural perspective, right? So all of us are aware of issues that a farmer today is facing, right? And farmer worldwide broadly is facing the same issues, right? He or she invests a ton of money in putting in a crop, is waiting for harvest. Anytime during the 3 months, 4 months of the harvest, there could be multiple situations, right? There could be a too much of rain, too little of rain, too much of heat, too little of heat. Suddenly there's a hailstorm, etc., etc., etc. So the farmer is exposed to all kinds of problems. In India, it just extends even more because there could be wild animals, there could be so many issues that could end up hurting the crop while it is in production. Now, the minute the farmer moves to a controlled environment, those things get eliminated almost completely, right? So, and that's the logic that is followed everywhere else. But there's a whole lot of other factors which are equally important as extreme weather, right? So, the second very critical point is that all of us are aware of the drop in the water tables across, not just across India, but most parts of the world. There is a depletion of water tables. And of course, we would want to conserve as much of water as we can, right? So, what the controlled environment does is it allows, because it's in a relatively so the question that you should ask yourselves is, how does a farmer today, let's say if he's growing tomatoes in his field, how does he water his field, right? So what he does is he turns the tube well on and he floods the space, ensures that there's 2-3 inches of water in the field, and then the thing is turned off, right? So that's not controlled agriculture, right? That's not precision farming. The plant doesn't necessarily need 3 inches of water all around, but that's the traditional old way of farming. What precision farming or controlled agriculture allows the farmer to do is to administer water and nutrients and fertilizers in precise quantities at the precise location, right? So if there is only an X ml of water required at that point in time, only that much would be administered, right? So there is a normal talk in terms of about 90% water savings. We know of situations, and I'll probably share a little bit about what we do as well, but we are in a position to save about 99% of the water. Right, so and whatever that we say is consumed is also recycled and brought back in. So it obviously saves off a whole lot of water. The other thing that happens is that the current way of, let's say, if I'm a farmer and I've done my sowing in the field, then I have to control pests. Right, so if I have to control pests, I will use pesticides, and I will do that multiple times over the life of a crop, right? And most of the time, I'll have to spray the pesticide on top of the produce that I'm doing, right? So that is why highly recommend that you not just wash what you buy from the market, but you also peel it off. But I can still assure you there's going to be a fair bit of pesticide in that. On the other hand, in controlled environments, whether it is in greenhouses or in vertical farming, there is zero use of pesticides, zero use, right? So, for example, we don't use any pesticides at all. Forget about on the cropping that we are doing. We don't even use it within the facility, right? So it's an absolute clean, healthy crop that you are getting out of a greenhouse, right? And that brings to a point where the farmer is in a position to get a higher value, slightly higher value, unfortunately not very high, but slightly higher value for the produce that he is doing. Also because he's able to ensure that the availability is through the year, right? So the benefit of a controlled environment, which would mean the temperature is controlled, humidity is controlled, water is controlled. I don't have to worry too much about a winter crop and a summer crop and a autumn crop, etc. I'm in a position to get my outputs on a fairly regular basis, right? So I hope that makes sense to all of you. If I put in crops on ground, I know that, and that unit model, fortunately, is extremely well established, right? So broadly, everyone would say that, hey, this is the number of kgs that you'll get per acre, right? In a controlled environment, you are normally able to get substantially higher output, right? So there is a rule in terms of about 3x is a minimum that you should be getting, a 3x, 3 times more in a controlled environment as what you'd get on ground. Of course, there could be much higher percentages that one could talk about as well, right? The other important piece is that land usage, because it is very high intensity, because it is well done, the land usage comes down substantially, right? So all of you would be aware, and this is more India centric, right? So in India, an average farmer really holds a fairly small amount of land, right? I mean, 1 acre for a really small farmer, but even the larger farmers would be in the range of about I think if I remember right, 6, 7, 8 acres is the max that a large Indian farmer holds, right? As against that, I don't know if you guys are aware, the average US farmer holds about 250 acres of land, right? So in India, it becomes that much more important for the farmer to be in a position to get the max out of the out of the land, that the limited land that he has access to. Right? Because there are no questions, I'm feeling almost bored. I'm sure so are you guys.
So
No,
students
no,
are
go
just waiting
ahead.
they are listening in a very.
No, that's okay. अरे आप बहुत सीरियस हो मैम, मैं मजाक कर रहा हूँ, you know.
No, sir.
Okay.
So students are waiting for the right time. After you complete, they will
Yeah.
definitely ask. They do have their
Okay.
queries.
Right. So if what I said is music to everyone's ear, right? Was urban centers, maybe you can do farming. Farmer in the rural area should also do, because he gets a lot more produce, etc., etc. Everything that I said, I mean, I don't think anyone would have reasons to dispute that. So why is it not catching on as quickly as it should, right? So you guys might not be necessarily aware. This is what we are doing in terms of controlled environment or hydroponics, etc., etc., is not a new business, right? The earliest known bit on this is 1600s. So as long back as that many years, that many centuries ago is when hydroponic was used, right? It was extensively used during the Second World War for the soldiers who were out there to get their food, fresh food, etc., because logistics supply lines were under stress and so on and so forth. So it's not new. But why is it that we are still growing very, 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 very gradually on this? So there would be it's my view, and that's why I'm in that business. But there's my view that at some point there would be a inflection point, and suddenly everyone would want to start doing it. But currently, that's not the case, right? So why is that not the case, right? So I think that's the important piece, right? So if you were to look at uh, there's before I get into why it's not the place, I think there is one other piece that I think we should understand, right? Most of the noise around controlled environment, agriculture, indoor ag, etc., comes from the West. India is still at a very, very nascent stage. There's decent work happening, but it is very early stages, right? So why is it that the West is looking at it, and what are the key reasons that they would look at it? And as I speak those reasons, you'd also realize that that is radically different from the way that developing economies would look at this space, right? So in the West, there's a lot of talk of ESG, right? I mean, ESG norms, which would mean environmentally friendly stuff, not using too much of fertilizer, not using too much of, I'm not saying that they are doing it, but there's a lot of talk about that. So there is a huge number of people who are willing to pay a premium for stuff that has been grown in controlled environments, right? Which are, let's say, they don't call it organic, but it will be closer to it being a organic kind of a growth, right? So customers are aware and they're willing to pay a little bit of premium around that. There is a lot more increased demand of freshness and taste, right? Which I mean, I wouldn't say that that's not available in India, but from a customer perspective, people are willing to say that, hey, this lettuce tastes great, and therefore I will necessarily go with that in the thing, right? Uh, and I think the most important thing in US and Europe, and why this is making sense, is because the labor cost is actually killing normal farming, right? While there is a huge amount of mechanization and automation that has happened even on land-based farming, labor cost today in the US is so high that and so difficult to get that, unless you are in a position, even if you have 500 acres of land, either you're doing it all on your own, which is backbreaking, or alternatively you need to get manpower. Manpower is available. If it is available, it is very expensive, or mostly it is not available, and therefore move to a more controlled environment thing, which is less taxing on manpower. You can do the same amount, better amount of production within that, right? Uh, in places which are emerging economies, right? And India obviously is one of them, but that's not limited to India, most of Africa and other places. There are two, three factors, right? So if you go and talk to a farmer who has, let's say, 2, 3 acres of land, he will immediately understand the need for him to go in for controlled agriculture, right? The problem is not the intent, the problem is the availability of funds, right? So infrastructurally, controlled environment is much more expensive than doing it on ground, right? The upfront cost, the capital expenditure in controlled environments is pretty high, right? The knowledge itself of how to run the system and automation and all that is a little limited. So farmer being a farmer says, I'm used to it. My dad used to operate like this. My granddad used to operate like this. So I can continue to do it on those lines. And unfortunately, what is happening is they're resorting to simpler solutions like overusing fertilizers, overusing pesticide, overusing water, which is all terrible, right? So all of you would have heard of things that are happening in some districts in Punjab, etc., where fertilizers have almost made the land untillable, but it is still being used, right? So that is an issue. The government is actually pushing this fairly well across the world, right? Governments of emerging economies, because I think food security becomes better defined if there is controlled environment, right? So let's say, for example, if there is a massive drought, right? if you have enough controlled environment agriculture farms that are operating, you can ride over that because you're using limited amount of water. If there's too much of a hailstorm, if there's too much of a rainfall or whatever, can be managed by way of this. So food security comes in, but you'll have to be careful of how far you stretch it, because there are some crops that are obviously suited for controlled environments. There are other crops that you have to necessarily stay out, right? So our staples and our grains, etc., would typically be outside because indoors it doesn't make sense, right? So like I said, so if all this that I'm saying is absolutely workable, etc., etc., so what are the big barriers on adapting this? Right? The number one barrier very clearly is a very high upfront cost. Right? So even if you have the land, you need to cough up a fair bit of money to set up proper greenhouses or proper structures. If you want to do it in urban India, you need multi-storied hollow sheds where you again have to set up a massive amount of infrastructure inside for you to be in a position to do controlled environment. Uh, the One of the huge problems in controlled environment agriculture. So let's take, for example, a real case of lettuce, right? Uh, you guys would be aware that lettuce, from the time you start sowing it till the time you harvest, is, let's say, a 35-day activity, right? So what do you do on ground? You put it in, you water it timely, you use your pest control, etc., done, and then 35 days you remove it, right? Now, if you're doing it indoors, right, what does lettuce need? Lettuce, when you plant it on ground, needed nutrients, right? So what does the plant do? It has those roots that are going in the ground. They suck out the nutrient as they require it, and they'll grow. And they need to do photosynthesis, which is what is available from sunlight, right? So on ground, both the soil-based nutrient and sunlight is free of cost. Right. So when the farmer harvests, he's not necessarily paying a sun cost and a nutrient cost, right? He's using, obviously, he's charging for his time and his land and so on, but he's not paying the input cost. But the minute you move the same lettuce indoors, right, then for about 30 days, you have to recreate the external environment inside. So how do you do it? You would have all seen those pipes that in which lettuce pods are placed in. They are called NFTs. That technology means that in the NFT pipe, you have to flow the nutrient, replicating what happens to the root when it is going in ground, right? So when the root still has to suck the nutrient, right? So you are doing it by way of very good, pure, high quality nutrient solution, right? So the root can suck it, but you have to supply it nutrient for 30 days. And nutrient solutions are expensive. And for 30 days, you'll have to keep moving the water around and nutrient and so on and so forth. So that's one huge cost. The second big cost is that you have to replicate the sun, right? Because the leaves need to do photosynthesis, right? So you'll have to put solar lights, you'll have to turn them on, turn them off, etc., to replicate the sun. So you are doing that for 30 plus days, right? Which means that there is the CEA, the controlled environment agriculture setups have a huge operating cost as well. Right. So it's not just the cost of setting it up, but the operating cost, because it is really draining the energy. Right. I mean, I know a lot of us are now trying to do it on solar, etc. But solar as in solar power panels, which are then replicating the sun inside. But you can imagine the amount of cost there is. Right. And then you have to control the temperature, and then you have to control the humidity. So it's like, I mean, all of us love to be in an air-conditioned environment. Your plant also loves to be in almost an air-conditioned environment, right? But that costs a ton of money, right? So that's huge problem, right? Your input cost is very high, your running cost is high. The bigger problem is that the customer is not necessarily willing to pay extra for hydroponically or indoor grown lettuce as against what he or she is buying from outside. So if your ma'am was to go out shopping, then someone was to sell her 100 rupee bunch of lettuce versus a 40 rupee bunch of lettuce, I can assure you she's going to pick up a 40 rupee bunch, for the simple reason that no one wants to overpay it, right? So the current situation is that the indoor production is more expensive than the outdoor production, right? So what is this leading to? The good news is that, I mean, there's a lot of tech involved. There's a lot of there's a lot of good work happening. Let me tell you, a little more about the terms that you would have probably heard, and maybe there are some terms that you can, if you've heard and I'm not covering it, then you could bring it up in the Q&A, and then we could discuss it, and maybe I'll learn one or two new terms. You guys would have heard of hydroponics, right? I mean, I think the lady who had introduced me also talked about hydroponics. Hydroponics is probably one of the oldest, simplest techniques that is being used, right? So it is just usage of water to grow the plant, right? So all of you would be aware that there are some plants which are some grains and some plants which are conducive to growing in water, right? So if it is just water and you add more nutrition to it, then it can grow out of that, right? So hydroponic is the oldest way of doing it and the simplest way of doing it, right? But there are multiple types of hydroponics, and we'll discuss that as we come. The second piece that I think typically gets discussed is aeroponics, right? So aeroponics, slightly different from hydroponics, but what it does is that it, you would have seen those tubes, right? So what it is doing is inside those tubes, it is using mist with nutrition, right? So it looks great. At times it works great as well. There are its own problems, etc. But that is aeroponics, right? How many of you have heard of this thing called aquaponics? And I was for the longest time confused about it. Aquaponics is where you use fish. So there's fish, which is below that, and then of course the droppings of fish, etc., turn out to be nutritious, and you are in a position to grow on top of it, right? So it's still not, all these three that I told you are soilless, right? So there's no usage of soils. I've discussed with you what NFTs are, right? So NFTs are longer tubes where you are growing these lettuce or whatever, tomatoes, etc. Where again you are doing more of hydroponics, but doing it in NFTs. You can also do hydroponics by way of non-NFT solutions as well, right? The other huge, I mean, I've discussed it, so I'll not probably cover the lighting thing in itself, but that's probably one good thing that is happening with the industry. All of us know the cost of LEDs, etc., has come down dramatically, right? So that has helped us ensure that the infrastructure that we are creating, if what was costing us, let's say, 50,000 rupees, maybe 7-8 years back, is down to about 4,000-5,000 rupees. So it allows us to bring the cost down quite substantially. But climate control is still a killer, right? So climate control by definition is the fact that we want to keep the temperature below 32 to 30, let's say below 35 in Indian conditions and above 8 degrees, right? So that's a ideal, comfortable temperature for any plant to grow without any stress. But that means that if my outside temperature is 44 degrees, I have to bring the temperature down, right? And that costs a fair bit of money, right? I mean, I am not necessarily talking of air conditioning. The Americans have been doing it for a while, but wahan pe energy costs are low. But here we are talking of at least cooling it down by way of desert coolers and cooling pads and so on and so forth to bring the temperature within manageable things. But if I take an example of, let's say, Ladakh, right? Now, in summers in Ladakh, no one has a problem growing anything. But the minute you hit winters, it becomes icy cold, right? So how does the farmer there operate in that kind of an environment? So if you travel to Ladakh, you'll see that most houses tend to have a polyhouse kind of a structure built behind them, right? That's where they're actually growing their greens and so on and so forth to take them through the winter. That's where a lot of those animals get parked in. If you talk to a Ladakhi, he'll say, I also go and sleep there because that is warmer than anywhere else that they can. Because during the day, there's a little bit of heat that builds up a kind of a better environment inside. right? What else? The other huge thing, and I just checked this, is the development of IoTs. Right now, all of us are now familiar or not familiar, but we talk about IoTs every day. Uh, the cost of IoTs has dropped, right? So what that allows us to do is to look at every parameter of what we are doing at a very at a fairly in a fairly easy manner, right? So for example, let's say I have a tube in which I'm putting nutrients and I'm flowing that, right? Now there could be multiple things that can go wrong in a large farm, right? Your pump breaks down, or the quantity of nutrition in the water has gone below what you want to, etc. So if I have a sensor within the water, and at every 5 meters, 10 meters, etc., the minute there is a drop on any of the parameters, I will get an alert from the IoT saying that, hey, there is a drop here, right? Now, uh, in a traditional sense, what used to happen is that, hey, if there is a drop there, someone will go turn the switch on, switch off, etc., etc. But now the magic has happened where you can use that data to additionally put it into AI, right? So once you plug those two in, then actually your AI is in a position to give you, as you go forward, give you much better information about the overall thing. So I'll give you an example. For example, that's something that we do, right? So there's a camera, an IoT camera that takes photograph of what we are growing. It is able to analyze real time if it is green enough, if it is grown enough, if it is the color is right, the thickness is right, etc. No human being is required to do that, right? And it does that every, depending on what you set it, it can do it every couple of seconds, but we look at every 30 minutes to try and look at that. Now, not only is it looking at that, it is analyzing it real time against batch images and then saying that, hey, there seems to be a yellowness that is developing here. So the solutions to that is that I need to give it extra nutrition. It'll automatically turn that pump on, a new kind of nutrition gets dropped in, and that is done, right? So a lot of what was otherwise human activity is now getting taken over by three things, right? I mean, IoT is at the base of it, because IoT is nothing but your camera, for example, your cell phone has a camera, which in a way is an IoT device. But when you marry it with machine learning, which is to say that every time there is a picture taken, the machine learns a little more and builds its own algorithm. And then you marry it to AI, it'll start taking decisions better than what you and I would take, right? Which also means that I can go on a holiday, not just yet, but I'm saying maybe few years down the line, it would probably be mostly automated. And therefore, the only job that humans have to do is actually sow the stuff and cut the stuff, right? Rest of it probably will get taken care of to a large extent, right? So while that being said, let me tell you that last 10 years in the US market, about $10 billion were invested in controlled environment agriculture, and now the market has collapsed, right? So the market of CEA has collapsed, right? What has happened is that people like your ma'am has not been paying the 100 rupees that was needed, right? So we've not been able to get the value that we want. So the unit economics of this business is still being questioned. Unit economic of vertical farming is being questioned. Unit economics of greenhouses is not being questioned. I think that has got established fairly well. Vertical farms, the way that it is being run in the US, is under a lot of stress, right? So let me shamefully do a little plug-in of what we do. Otherwise, I will not be doing justice to my company and my time. So we have moved away from human consumption. So what I told you is that there seems to be a problem with the replicating what is the sunlight and the nutrition bit, etc., etc. So we've looked at a problem which is different, right? So the area that we are focused on is livestock, and the logic being that every second household in India, rural household in India, has 2 to 3 cows or buffaloes that they keep, and that's where they get most of their regular money from, right? Because the milk that they sell is very regular. Any animal needs quality fodder, right? Green fodder. Now, what used to happen when I was your age is that cows were let go and they used to roam around in a grazing field, come back in the evening. So they would have spent time grazing on grass, right? Now, what has happened in India is that grazing lands have disappeared, right? It is because of the population pressure, farming pressure, etc. All grazing lands are gone. So India has become extremely green fodder deficit, right? Which means that while we are the largest producer of milk in the world, our average productivity per animal is very, very low. So what we've decided is that, hey, we want to be the biggest green fodder producer in the country while not using land, right? So I can go and buy 100, 500, 1,000 acres of land and try and grow green fodder on it and give it to farmers, etc. But that's not the route that we're taking. We are growing green fodder in hydroponic methods in controlled environments, right? So we use a 10,000 square feet area in rural India to grow extremely nutrition dense fodder, right? Now, why am I able to do it and still believe that that's the right thing to do, in spite of the world saying that hydroponic is a bit of a problem baby, is because we move our product from a grain to the fodder which the animal can eat in 10 days at a pre-photosynthesis stage, right? So I don't need the sun. I can do it in more or less dark warehouses, right? So I don't have to necessarily be an energy guzzler. I also don't need too much of nutrition because I am really sprouting seeds, grains, right? So I am unlocking the existing energy within the grain. I'm not necessarily making it grow with extra nutrition. So because of these two factors, we believe that we are in a good space. It's a unique space within hydroponics, and that's, of course, we are chemical free, we are pesticide free, and we are able to get the output that we need. With
But
that, I think,
sir, adding to this, we would like to know that how your company is doing it, because we know that the vision behind this might be helping others and the farmers especially. So how this idea came and how you are doing this?
the idea came because we were brilliant. No,
Definitely, sir. But we would like to know if you would like to share your the secret mixture, you can say, please.
if I share the secret, then I'll have to kill how many people? I mean, there are a whole lot of people on the call.
No,
No, so
it's up to
I'll
you.
no, I'll tell you, it is actually pretty simple. I would request all of you to try it out in your own dorms and hostel rooms. Right? It is that simple. You take a tray, right? And let's say you take the season is good for maize, so you take maize grain. Don't go in for seed. Use grain. Grain is cheaper. It's about $25 if you go into the market and buy good quality grain, right? You wash it thoroughly, right? Because I can assure you, there's a lot of chemicals on the grain that you're buying. So wash it thoroughly, right? And you'll have to wash it about 3 to 4 times. Like, there are chemicals that you can add for better cleaning, etc. And then you put it in for germination. It takes 1 day to germinate, right? Which all of you would have tried out at home also. We try and grow things. And then you put it in that tray, right? After germination, you put it in the tray and then you diligently water it every 4 hours for the next 7 days, right? That's the simplest way that I can explain to you what we do, right? The only difference is that we grow about 10 tons of that a day, right? So when we have to grow that much, then of course industrial level processes come into play, right? So which means that we use a lot of automation in our systems because we are growing these in rural villages, deep India, Kanpur Dehat, Agra Dehat, etc. We cannot, and the boys or girls that we recruit who are running those centers are not extremely high aptitude guys, right? So we have to equip them, train them, and get them to do it without a single day being a down day for us, right? So we've set our processes right. We've ensured that there's a lot of automation that is there, but more than that, every physical process has a digital twin, right? So if there is a problem that the digital twin sees that there's a fungal growth, it is able to tell the physical guy as to what needs to be done. If the physical guy has a problem that he spots, he's able to address that by way of the digital learning, etc. So we want to be the largest fodder company in the world. We probably already are in some senses, but we are looking at setting up thousands and thousands of these centers across the country. For that, it is important to set the fundamentals right, right? So every process, every activity that happens on ground, whether it is, like I said, I mean, take something as simple as washing. Uh, so I told you to take maybe a kg of seed and wash it around, etc., etc. You will do it diligently because you want to test it out. But imagine if you have to wash 500 kgs a day, every day for 365 days at a remote location, right? So someone somewhere will say, "Arey, chalta hai yaar, thoda jaldi kar lo," and move it on, right? But if that happens, we'll get into serious trouble, right? So how do we ensure that nothing like that, no breach of protocol happens on ground? How do we track that? Not leave it to anyone's word, but track it by way of AIs and I mean the IoTs and the subsequent AIs, etc. is what we are trying to do. So it is the process itself, ma'am, is not very difficult. I think the scaling up of the process for it to be nationwide. So, for example, we run a unit in Pune. Temperature there is radically different from, let's say, the unit in Sariska. The grains that we get there, etc., would be very different as well. So, how do we adjust that? I think that's the magic of the business.
So can the student be involved into such live projects, because as they are moving towards in the third semester, so they will get an idea that how the functionality about the functionality and how things work. Can you help them with that, please?
Yeah, we do. So, typically we, at any point in time, we have projects that we do with our intern people who come in and intern with us, right? So it's not a what we do, and that wasn't the intent of this call, but let me, Shweta, just explain that. We create projects beforehand, right? So it could be about, let's say, identifying the right grain that we want to do. And for that, we have a lab in Pusa that we work with, where we are able to do that, or setting a protocol, right? So if that becomes a project, then while there would be a senior guy associated with that project, he or she might be happy working with one or two interns to do it deeply. And I'm not just saying research project, but there could be sales driven things as well, right? Ultimately, my customer is the chota farmer of India, right? Who has to buy fodder from me, is to subscribe fodder with me. So how do we identify who it is? So we've recently, and I'll send that to you, Shweta, separately. But we've done a study on the impact of our fodder
Yeah.
on cattle in May in UP. Great results, etc. So there are number of projects. So it depends on what are the projects that are live at that point in time, and people who want to come in. There's a normal process where the HR goes through, and you'll have to talk to the person who's handling that project. If they like the intern, if the interns like them, then yeah, we are happy to bring in a couple of people to do that.
Thank you so very much sir, for the answer.
Okay, so I'm broadly done. I think I took much longer than what I had anticipated. I told Shweta about 30 minutes or so, but this has just gone on. So sorry about that, guys. But
No.
can we get into a Q&A if
Yes.
there are any questions?
Yes, sir. Students are waiting. They do have their queries. And thank you so very much for giving the insightful, detailed information about the area, the control environment agriculture. Now, I would request Samriti to go ahead with the question answer round, please.
Thank you so much, sir, for your inspiring words and valuable insights. Now, I invite the participants to ask their questions. You may raise your hand or post in the chat box. Yes, Harshit, kindly unmute yourself.
Good evening, sir. Sir, my name is Harshit Singh Sachan, and my question is what are the risk factors which can cause major loss to the yield in controlled environment agriculture?
Yeah, great question, Arshit. That's what keeps us awake at night. So there can't be a better question than that. So there are number of factors that cause the loss, right, or cause failures of farms overall, right? One of them is so I would broadly divide that into three categories, right? So there is the number one is fungal. There are, as you would know, there are different kinds of fungal growths that can potentially happen because we are operating in a closed environment, right? And the humidity levels are normally high. The fungus growth can be pretty severe, right? And fungus growth, as you would understand, tends to spread fast as well, right? So the spores, the fungus spores, uh, are in the air. As we go around, there's fungus everywhere, but it's just that it needs the right environment to sprout and to grow into the. And once the fungus is caught on, it almost becomes impossible to get off it, right? The second huge thing is actually pests, right? Now, and that maybe actually it is across the country, right? So what ends up happening is that you are creating an environment which is uh, which is laden with good quality food for a pest, right? So let's say a beetle or a fly or whatever, if it is able to enter your facility, it will land on what is a decaying organic matter. So let's say, for example, a grain or something similar to that, right? And because that instinctively, I mean, the smell of that, etc., will attract the pest. Once the pest lands there, it is not doing that to eat what is rotting, right? It is landing there to lay eggs. So what will happen is before you know it, your whatever you're growing suddenly has maybe 3 dozen eggs that have been laid in it, right? You can't kill the eggs. So the eggs will then subsequently germinate into larvae, right? And the larvae will move around your facility. I mean your product. They will then turn into a full-fledged insect. It's only when the thing is flying around or that, only at that stage you'd be in a position to kill it, right? So if that happens and happens consistently, you could assume that you're done, right? The third thing is that because there's not too much of crop rotation that happens in this place, right? So maybe I built a facility for lettuce, so I'll keep growing lettuce after lettuce after lettuce, right? So if there is a lettuce specific infection that hits you, right, then it becomes a problem. In a normal field, what will happen is that you grow lettuce and then you grow something else and then you grow something else, so you're able to move away from potential problems there. That's about it. I mean, if those are less, then yeah, that's about it.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, Sivans, unmute yourself.
So good evening, sir. My name is Shivan Singh, sir. I wanted to know, sir, where do you recruit the skilled laborers required for this type of farming?
Hmm. Good question. The answer is there is no skilled labor specifically for this field, right? I mean, you can go and hunt anywhere, there will be no skilled labor. So you recruit someone who you then train on the job, right? It is not rocket science on this, right? I mean, if your SOPs are well defined, if it is well written, the person has to get trained on your SOPs. The industry in itself is so small that you can't have a situation. So if I was, for example, opening a new restaurant in Delhi, I would say that let me catch hold of a chef from a different restaurant and a steward from a third restaurant, etc. This doesn't work like that, right? I mean, you would have probably 10 centers in a 100-kilometer radius, which might have 3 people each. So difficult to poach talent. And there is no college. I don't know if ISAB has a separate area where they do controlled environment agriculture. I would insist on you
Yes.
guys setting up a center in your cafeteria where at least you should grow lettuce and eat your fresh produce, right? And then I could say that, hey, we have experts in that space who we can potentially hire.
So definitely, sir, we have already started with this process, and that's the reason, we were requesting you to let us know that how we can go ahead with this, because already the research department has started working in this area. where a student work practically on these aspects and can gain the insight. And we would request your guidance into this vertical.
No, I think Shivnaz Singh should lead this. I think it's a great question that he asked. Shivnaz, if you don't get a cafeteria mein lettuce produced locally, you should sit on a dharna. That's the best way of making it happen. Happy to help, Shweta,
Yeah,
on
yeah.
anything that needs to be
Thank you
done
so
there.
very
Yeah.
much. Thank you so very much, sir, for solving students' queries. Now would request Samriddhi to